much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the first session today. I'm going to talk about breaking through with differentiated AI, and I do want to give a little caveat already right at the beginning. I am going to talk mostly, or at least for a big part, about generative AI. Why? Well, because pretty much everyone is talking about generative AI at the moment when they're talking about AI. It's definitely the field when we talk to our customers or the field where they have most questions. They also have most concerns in this field, but they also, nevertheless, it's an area where they are or planning to invest significantly. And coming with these investments, typically all of our customers have pretty high expectations in the value that they will get out of these investments in the future. Now, when it comes to the value coming from generative AI specifically, there's no shortage over the last couple of years finding some very, very big numbers on the internet. Pretty much every consulting firm, every market intelligence firm, as a matter of fact, every investment firm or investment banking firm has come up with expectations around how much value generative AI is going to add to the local, national, or global economies. Typically, at this point, I show a number which is 4.4 trillion US dollars, which you might realize or you might remember, it's from a US, very big US consulting firm, and they published it in 2023 already, and it's the total uplift to the global economy coming, or they expect to come from generative AI alone. Now, I don't want to talk about the macro level, so I'm bringing it down to the company or the institution level. And I'm also not going to talk about all of these very complex little details that companies or teams need to think about when they're thinking or trying about making AI or generative AI as frictionless reality as possible in their organizations. And it is very complex and very difficult, despite often sometimes what you read in the media and it feels like it's a slam dunk and everyone can do it. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk or offer a little glimpse into the future, which is hopefully a near future. And in this future, I want to show a way where we think or how companies can in the future get a share of this global value gain that I've just mentioned for themselves. So how do they get value from their investments, but hopefully not only value, but also how can they get a competitive advantage in the market based on their investments into AI and generative AI. With that, what I would like you to do is imagine a little situation. And what we have here is a very simple schematic presentation of this situation. And it's a situation a company, maybe your company, finds itself in once it starts and embraces AI, generative AI. So what they do is they start on the x-axis, which shows the spend they do into AI. They start small, a little proof of concept, a little bit experimenting, but then they move on, they get more professional, they deploy the models, and the spend will rise. It will get more and more, because there's lots to spend on, right? You have AI models which you need to subscribe to, or if you're a bigger company, you might even try building your own. But there's a lot of money to be spent. You need upskilling the wider workforce, but you also need potentially specialists, data scientist specialists who can work with these models. You need additional cloud computing costs, storage, compute costs will come, and of course you will have consulting costs, hopefully, because consultants can often help you identify exactly the use cases which are important for yourself in order to gain value going forward. Now, lots of spending, but hopefully, or ideally, especially if companies pay attention to all of these little complex details that I'm glossing over, they will get a lot of value out of these investments. And this value can come from, as you can see here on the y-axis, it can come from improved efficiency, better automation. It might be new products and new services they can offer. It might be simply happier customers. So how you define value is going to be really important, and it's not one value or the one metric for each company. But overall, lots of spending and hopefully lots of value realized. Now, just in terms of this simple graph, I sometimes get the question, well, is it really linear? Well, probably not. And it also, for my purpose here, is not really important. So it doesn't matter whether it's a linear graph, is it an S shape, or maybe is it a log, lots of value at the beginning and then it tails off. That's not what I want you to focus on. What I would like you to focus on or imagine is a situation, well, if you're doing that, then most likely one or two or all of your competitors are going to do the same, because otherwise, for one reason or the other, they are not going to stay your competitors for very much longer. So the situation you're really going to find yourself in probably looks a lot more like this. You are the blue line. You're investing, you're getting value. But at the same time, your competitors or your competitor is doing the same thing. They're investing into AI, they're investing into use cases, they're probably subscribing to the same AI models out there in the market as you do. So in the end, what you might find yourself in, or what is probably going to happen is each company is investing, they're investing more and more, and overall, it's a huge value gain for each company. But at the same point, as you can see here up here, there's very little difference between you and your competition in terms of value gained. So overall, while there's value, the actual competitive advantage might be 0 or close to nil. Maybe if you want to go back in history a little bit, and there were similar transitions already, Chris mentioned internet, cloud. I want to give you another example where exactly something like that has played out, in my opinion. And that is early 90s when ERP systems came onto the market. So I don't know who was around at that time already, but at the time when ERP systems were new, and especially the manufacturing companies started to embrace them, the companies who embraced first and who implemented them, and assuming they implemented them right, because it's hard to do that, it's similar like implementing AI systems, it's hard. But if they'd done it, they got immense value out of these ERP systems. They had better understanding about their inventories, they had better understanding of their supply chains, they had less production stoppages because they had the right parts at the right time at the right site. So huge value gains. And at that time, while there were still companies who were wondering, well, should I invest into ERP or not, they also had a huge competitive advantage. While other companies still were manually trying to work out what's going on, they had their systems telling it to them in near real time. But as time went on, and everyone realized ERP systems are really important, and every manufacturing and after manufacturing, pretty much every other company or large company installed ERP systems, this competitive edge got smaller and smaller and smaller. Having a ERP system didn't really distinguish yourself anymore from your competition, but each competition still, to the day, gets massive amounts of value out of them. Just imagine a large company without an ERP system today. So this is similar to this AI story here. So basically, you're spending to keep up, but it's a necessity because otherwise you're going to fall behind. So the real question is, how do you move from a situation like that, with little competitive advantage, to a situation that might look a little bit more like this? So you invest along this line, your competitor invests, but somehow you manage to be this blue line. With every investment, you manage to get a little bit more value out of these investments, multiplying it, and in the end, you have a significant value gap and advantage compared to your competition. Now, there are probably, if one starts thinking about it, different ways and potentially multiple ways of achieving that. The one area I want to focus on today is the concept of an agent. And specifically, I would like to talk about an AI agent focused on the analytics or insights field. And the reason I want to do or focus on this area is that, in my opinion, for the last 25, 30, 35 years, whenever management information, business information started to be a field, and despite all of the investments that companies have been doing over the last years and decades in consolidating their data, building consolidated data lakes, lake houses, data warehouses, building out data catalogs, master data management, all of these things you need and which are required, they still often fail of getting core and crucial information out of all of these data into the hands of the business users who need them for decision making. And this famous last mile or last gap where they are blocked is an area where we think AI agents will play an immense role in order to help companies differentiate themselves and gain value compared to the competition. Now, how does that look, or how could it look like? Let's start with how currently it looks probably in most organizations, or the most organizations I know or I have worked in. And what you see here is typically if you're a business person and you have a question which isn't covered by one of the standard dashboards available in your company, or even being able to get to it via a self-service offering, which is often the case because the business person doesn't have a basic statistical training, he doesn't know any querying language, he doesn't want to understand the data in that detail to get to the bottom of his question. So the only way that person can get to the bottom of it is to go and ask an analyst. Now, in the companies where I have worked, an analyst is a pretty expensive resource, which means that it's pretty hard of getting hold of one. So trying to get an analyst to answer your question typically requires you entering a ticketing system, entering some kind of queue and waiting for an analyst to become available to help you answer your question. Now, even, let's say you're important enough or you waited long enough and you manage to get an analyst, you still have the situation that you have a business person speaking to a technical person. Now, I had the pleasure of doing it from both sides. And it's not an easy process. It goes back and forth. Sometimes it goes quicker, sometimes it goes, takes several iterations, but it needs the business person to describe his problem very concisely. And it needs the analyst to understand at least a little bit of the business side to be able to understand, okay, what does this person really want from me, and how does that relate to my tables and my databases that I'm familiar with? Now, assuming that has happened, and both of them believe they have managed to communicate what they need and what can be done, then you've got this vertical. And again, this vertical in this current process is full of limitations. Why? Well, you obviously hope that the analyst, being the analyst, has this innate curiosity. So you hope that, having heard the question, he really wants to understand, or they really want to understand what's going on. They don't just want to give you the first thing that comes up. They really want to investigate the data, look for further little correlations, and work out what is really happening. So that's the first one that they need to do. Then, well, they need the skill set. Now, not every analyst is the same, as you probably know. Some will have more technical skills than others, but you need some SQL skills to write an additional query. You might need some Python skill to do a little bit of forecasting. So this kind of skill set is required. And lastly, of course, they need to have access to all the data as quickly as possible. Again, in large corporations, that might take a while, because if you don't have the access, you have to get the access, and that can take time as well. On top of this line here, let's assume any of these points isn't really there. The analyst doesn't have the right skill set, or he doesn't have the access to the data. What often happens, they will have to ask a colleague. So they go to a data engineer, an analytics engineer, or data scientist, and the whole process, with all its limitations, is going to kick off again, adding to delays and adding to further inaccuracies potentially. But once that has happened, what's going to happen? The analyst still needs to put all of these results together, either in a nice report or a dashboard, and bring it up to the business person in order for them to understand it. And then obviously what often happens is, well, the business person realizes it's not exactly what I wanted, and this whole process might start again in order to clarify or dive a little bit deeper. Now, in the future, in the near future, this process, we believe, is going to benefit massively, not just the process, but also the business person and the corporation overall, from an AI agent taking over basically this whole question asking and then finding the answer process. So how this would look like is, well, you still have the business person, and he still asks his question. He still has the same nagging doubt about something he wants to have clarified. But instead of having to wait for an agent, for a data analyst, he now has a chat interface. He can access it whenever he likes. If he wants to do it 24 hours a day, he can do it 24 hours a day. There are no limitations and no constraints, as long as the company is willing to pay for the compute and all of the other costs. They can do that all the time. The other limitations, analytical skills, access to data, all of that obviously goes away as well, because as long as you connect all of your data sources, you can immediately build in access controls. So automatically, the agent can decide, can I give this information to this person, yes or no? And you can also, in order to get over these analytical skills, either pre-train agents, models, on the specific skills, or you can provide state-of-the-art subroutines, which the agent then can leverage in order to boost and make it more efficient. And obviously, as you know, using ChatGPT, it's near instant. So you type in your question, the answer comes back, and it's there. It doesn't mean that that answer will be what you're looking for, but other than in the old process where you have to wait and the whole process has to go on again for a couple of hours or days, you can do it instantaneously. You get an answer, you're not quite sure it's the right thing, you rephrase your question, and you go again and again and again until you get it. And it can be in a matter of minutes rather than days and hours. Hours and days. Now, one question that always comes up is, well, what happens to the analyst? Are they redundant? Absolutely not. Neither the analyst, nor the engineer, nor the data scientist become redundant in this process. It's much more shifting of roles and responsibilities. Rather than being the person that has to engage directly with the business person and potentially spend a lot of time on that part, they can really spend time on what they were originally trained for and what they probably can do best, namely either build these models, maintain them, make sure they are working accurately, look at the data, making sure the data sources are always up to date, all of these things, and basically act as a last resort, as a human in the loop, in order to support any business user who asks a question and might have issues with the agent, and then can reach out to a human to help or support him. Now, how does it look like for a business user? Well, probably exactly like what you see at the moment when you pull up any of the current large language models and internet interface. It's a chat window. And in this case, it's an agent supporting a sales team, and the salesperson has a certain question about a sales target in the US West. And he gives some ideas what he thinks is behind it or not, and he types it in and hits enter, and he gets his answer. Very quickly, the agent comes back and says, well, yeah, I can help you. created a dashboard, here it is, with all the insights, but then, having all the data sources available, the agent might have found additional things that the original question didn't really encompass, but he thinks it's important, so they point this out as well. Now, if that's not what they want, they can type in the next question, and it goes on. So that's how the end user would see it, which is lovely because it's easy, and it allows the user to write his questions in the way he thinks about it. Behind the scene, it's of course going to be a lot more complicated. And this is a highly simplified view of how this looks in the background. But there are a couple of crucial steps that need to take place on a high level in order for that to work. So the first one is obviously, once the question is typed into the chat interface, you need a model or potentially a group of models that is able to interpret this question, exactly what's happening at now when you type something into ChatGPT. So it needs to interpret the question, and it needs to be able to break it down in subsidiary components or tasks that need to be solved in order to answer that question. So this is the step going from 1 to 2. And depending on the kind of question that is posed, the agent might find, well, I have some data, but I don't have all the data, or I have data not cut correctly in a different granularity. So it needs to go and write some SQL code, get the data get the raw data, and change it accordingly. It might also then need to write some Python model in order to build a forecasting model on this data in order to get the insights requested for how something's going to look like in the next quarters. And it might also then need to identify additional points that are related to this topic but didn't come up in the original question. And then once all of this is running and done, you need an agent or several models that check it, similar like in an adversarial setting, where one model checks the output of another model, whether that makes sense compared to the previous question, and then groups it all together, builds a dashboard, for example, or a report, and feed it back to the user. Now, some of you who are more in the technical details might go, well, all of that exists today, so where's the near future aspect of this? And it's true. A lot of these aspects do exist today. You can find models that are trained to help you write code, refactor your code. All of that exists. You can write models that can write Python. All of that exists. What does not exist, in my opinion, and I haven't seen it at least, is models that do that to the quality needed to let it run automatically. I think you have models that can support coders, but not do it fully automatically themselves. And the other big step where I think really doesn't exist at the moment is up here, actually, between step 1 and step 2. Because this model, or the group of models that is able to interpret your question and break it up into these sub-items that need to be solved, I haven't seen yet. You can guide a model with prompt engineering, obviously. You can do that directly, trying the user to do that, or you can try to do it in the background. But then you limit how flexible that agent can be, because you're already basically defining the pathways, these pathways here, that the model can take later on in order to solve your question. So this, for me, is the near future, one of the near future aspects here. It doesn't exist yet. I haven't seen it yet. With that, just coming to the point of differentiation, because similar with ERP systems, if you install an agent, you can differentiate yourself from your competition. You get value, you have a competitive advantage. But what about, well, the company that also installs an agent? Then it's kind of, well, they've got an agent, you've got an agent. Is then all the differentiation lost? We believe not really, because an agent, especially if it's multi-language models, so multiple language models stuck together in one agent, it's so complex and there are so many individual components that each of these components will offer the opportunity or the potential to really differentiate yourself and tailor them to your specific business needs. And even in let's say, one company in the same industry producing the same product, it will never be identical to his competition. So there will always be room either by, for example, deciding that you fine-tune a large language model to a specific data set that you have, that is specific to you and not to your competition. It might be the way that you bring the different data sources or which kind of data sources you bring and make available to that agent. So there are, in that agent concept, multiple ways of differentiating yourself from your competition in order to gain value. That, of course, brings you to the question, well, okay, that's great. So I want an agent. How do I get one? How do I build one? And again, on a high level, there are basically three main ways of doing it. On the left, there's you do everything from scratch and you build everything yourself. So this obviously has the advantage that you can tailor every step of the development and of the agent to exactly your needs and what you want in your company. It comes with the downside that you then need all the software engineers, all the data scientists, all the data engineers. You need the whole infrastructure to build these agents end-to-end, not only build it once, but then also be able to maintain them on an ongoing basis. And that is extremely expensive. And most likely for most companies, it's an unrealistic scenario because it's not their core business building agents. They want an agent, but they don't want necessarily to build and go dive into all the details. On the other side, you have this scenario on the right where a company says, well, I'm just going to buy them off the shelf. And it already exists at the moment, but it will definitely exist in the future, where tech companies or startups will produce these agents for a specific task, and you can buy them, plug them into your data, and they will probably work and gain value. So it gives you value. But it's unlikely that these models or these agents off the shelf will offer you the differentiation you need in the long run to distinguish yourself from your competition. So overall, we believe, well, the one is not realistic, too expensive. The one is not differentiated enough. We believe, for obvious reasons, but also for the reasons I just mentioned here, that you need a platform that allows you to build these agents yourself with still enough flexibility to adjust them to your needs, but still being able to use or reuse components in this development process in order to keep costs low and make it as simple as possible. Because even though these agents are extremely complex, in the end, they shouldn't be any different in development than any other AI or machine learning project that you're running, right? You still need your end-to-end data platform. You still need to be able to access your data, combine the data sources, change some of the data, and then you build in these different AI models, be it classical AI, if there is such a thing as classical AI, or these generative AI models, and it needs to be end-to-end, and you need to be able to do this end-to-end on one platform. Now, I spoke or gave an example about a sales agent. It's very hard to believe that there's any specific area that is going to be immediately be obvious for where do you want to apply such an agent or such a fleet of agents. It's also, if you look at this, you might think, well, I'm going to develop one agent that covers everything, which is a reasonable thought. You might go, well, I build one agent, has access to all of my data in the company, and it can answer any question that comes along from anyone at any time. That might be a scenario in the long term, in the further away future. We don't believe that's a near future scenario, simply because it's too complex. It will be too complex to build an engine that is efficiently and cost efficiently built to cover all the aspects in a company at any time for any user. More likely, what is going to happen is, especially at the beginning, is that you build a fleet of agents or specific agents for certain sub-areas or sub-departments in your company, which fulfill a specific need for that area. So, for example, obviously sales. Is a salesperson, is an account executive going to have questions about HR? Maybe, but probably not. And even if, then probably he shouldn't be asking these questions maybe anyway. So they're going to have a fleet of agents focusing on this specific area. Whether each of these agents will be presented as a separate agent to the end user is a different question. It might still be hidden behind the same chat interface, and only once you type in your question will it decide which of these agents jumps in and answers the question. But it's more likely in terms of building them cost effectively and also in terms of maintainability that it's going to be individual agents initially. With that, I'm coming close to my end. One of the questions I sometimes get is, well, and talking to customers is, well, where should we start? Where should we start building such an agent? Which area is really important for us? And the brutal, blunt answer is, I don't know, because I'm not inside each organization to that detail. And that is really one of these unfortunate complex details that companies will have to solve, either on their own or with a consulting firm. They need to decide which is the area, where do we see the biggest value return of bringing such an agent in. And it's not going to be the same area for different companies. So whether it's financial planning or omnichannel modeling or what have you on here, it's one of these key decisions a company needs to be able to make at the beginning in order to get the most value out of their investments in the long term. With that, thank you very much for your attention, and I hand back to Sonja.